Sometimes the first person to stop running is the one who changes everything. The alarms were still screaming when Platform 14 disappeared into smoke. Red emergency lights pulsed across the ceiling of New Avalon Central Station, while thousands of passengers pushed toward the exits in a wave of terrified bodies and scattered luggage. The air smelled like burned circuitry, overheated metal, and the bitter sting of ozone from the damaged rail engines below. Somewhere deeper in the station, another transformer burst with a sharp crack that rattled the glass walls. 8-year-old Ethan Cole lost his mother's hand 3 minutes earlier. 1 second she had been beside him near the vending kiosks, her fingers wrapped tightly around his sleeve. The next, panic swallowed her whole. Now he stood alone near a flickering information terminal, breathing hard beneath the oversized blue winter coat his dad had bought him before the trip to Earth Sector 2. Around him, adults shoved past without looking down. A woman nearly knocked him over with her suitcase. A station officer sprinted by yelling into a headset. All civilians evacuate immediately. Biological threat detected on the lower platform. Ethan looked toward the smoke pouring up from the train tunnel. Everyone else was looking away from it. That was why he noticed her first. At first, she didn't even look real. A massive silhouette emerged slowly through the haze beneath the flashing red lights, tall enough that her head nearly brushed the underside of the damaged platform signs. People screamed the moment they saw her. "Oh God, what is that thing? Run!" Someone dropped a food tray that shattered across the floor. Security drones descended from the ceiling with mechanical whirs, blue targeting beams slicing through the smoke like cold rain. The figure stepped forward again. Female. Alien. At least 8 feet tall. Her skin shimmered dark blue beneath the emergency lighting, though parts of it looked almost violet where ash clung to her arms. Thick restraint cuffs hung broken from one wrist, sparks snapping weakly from exposed wires. Long silver-white hair fell across her face in tangled strands, partially hiding. Glowing amber eyes that darted wildly across the crowd. She looked terrified. Ethan frowned. That part didn't make sense. Monsters weren't supposed to look scared. Another drone dropped lower. "Warning," the machine announced through static-filled speakers. "Unregistered biological entity detected. Stand clear." The alien girl flinched at the sound. Ethan noticed the way her shoulders curled inward, protective instead of aggressive. Her breathing looked uneven. One clawed hand pressed tightly against her side as dark purple blood dripped slowly between her fingers onto the polished station floor. She wasn't chasing anyone. She was hurt. A businessman near Ethan pointed toward her with a shaking hand. "That's one of them," he whispered. "One of the war creatures." Ethan didn't know what that meant. He only knew everyone kept calling her a thing while she stood there alone in the smoke, like an animal surrounded by hunters. The alien girl took another slow step backward as the drones tightened their formation around her. More security officers arrived from the upper escalators carrying pulse rifles, their boots echoing sharply across the metal floor. "Target contained," one officer barked. "Weapons ready." The alien girl's glowing eyes moved frantically from weapon to weapon. Then they landed on Ethan. For a moment, neither of them moved. The station noise faded behind the ringing alarms. Ethan saw something strange in her face then. Not anger. Not rage. Fear. The kind he remembered feeling the night his father never came home from the mining collapse on Europa Colony. The kind that made your chest hurt because nobody was coming to help you. The officer raised his rifle. "Do not approach the entity." Ethan looked at the frightened alien girl standing alone beneath the red lights, while every person in the station backed away from her. Then he tightened his small hand around the strap of his backpack and took one slow step forward. The nearest security drone locked onto Ethan instantly. A cold blue beam slid across the front of his winter coat, while warning sirens pulsed harder through the station ceiling. "Civilian child detected in restricted zone," the machine announced. "Return to evacuation route immediately." Ethan barely heard it. His eyes stayed fixed on the alien girl standing in the smoke 20 feet away. Up close, she looked even less like the monsters people whispered about on the news channels. She looked exhausted. One of her knees trembled slightly beneath her weight, forcing her to lean against the shattered side of the train car behind her. Thin curls of steam rose from damaged metal restraints hanging from her wrists. The polished floor beneath her bare feet was streaked with ash and melted frost from the station cooling systems. Another officer moved into position beside the first. "Kid," he shouted, lowering his rifle slightly. "Move away from the entity now." Ethan swallowed hard. He knew he should have been scared. The alien girl was enormous compared to him. Her clawed hands could probably crush steel. Strange dark markings spread beneath the torn fabric along her neck and shoulders like veins made of silver light. But none of that matched the expression in her eyes. She looked cornered, like one more loud sound would break something inside her completely. Ethan took another small step forward. Gasps rippled through the crowd behind him. "What is he doing?" someone whispered. "Get that kid out of there." The alien girl reacted instantly. Her body tensed. Amber eyes widened. A low sound escaped her throat. Not angry, not threatening, but uncertain. She backed away from him instead of moving closer. That was when Ethan noticed her hand shaking. Not the hand pressed against her wound. The other one. The one hanging at her side. She was afraid of him too. The realization settled strangely inside his chest. Ethan slowly pulled off his right mitten. Cold station air bit instantly at his fingers. Then, very carefully, he held out his hand. "It is okay," he said softly. "I am not going to hurt you." Every drone in the station shifted position with mechanical clicks. Targeting beams tightened around the alien girl's chest. One wrong movement, and the entire platform felt ready to explode into chaos. But the girl did not attack. She just stared at Ethan's outstretched hand like she had never seen anything like it before. Her breathing slowed slightly. Ethan could hear it now beneath the alarms. Ragged, uneven, human, in a strange way. The officer nearest the barricade cursed under his breath. "Why is it not reacting?" Another answered quietly. "Maybe it is waiting." Ethan ignored them. "My name is Ethan," he said after a second. "You look hurt." The alien girl blinked slowly. Her silver-white hair shifted across her face as another burst of hot air rolled through the damaged tunnel behind her. For a moment, Ethan thought she might collapse. Then something changed in her expression. Not trust. Not yet. More like confusion. As if her mind could not fit this moment into anything she understood about the world. The massive creature everyone feared lowered her head slightly toward the small human boy standing alone before her. Then, with painful hesitation, she moved her trembling hand forward a few inches. The crowd behind Ethan fell silent. Even the officers stopped shouting. Her claws were long and dark like polished stone, but they moved carefully through the air, avoiding sudden motions. Ethan did not pull back. He only stepped closer until he could finally see the tiny reflections of the emergency lights trembling in her golden eyes. Purple blood still dripped slowly between her fingers onto the station floor. She smelled faintly of smoke, antiseptic chemicals, and cold metal. Not death. Not danger. Just pain. Her hand stopped inches from his. Then one of the security drones suddenly crackled louder overhead. Warning. Biological threat level increasing. The alien girl flinched violently at the sound. Ethan saw panic flood her face again as the drones lowered their weapons all at once. The targeting beams turned from blue to red. Ethan heard the sharp electronic whine before he understood what it meant. Around the station platform, people backed away even farther, pressing against walls and overturned luggage carts as the security drones hovered lower through the smoke. Their metal frames reflected the emergency lights in cold crimson flashes. The alien girl froze completely. Every muscle in her body tightened beneath the torn gray fabric wrapped around her shoulders. Ethan could actually see the panic hit her like a physical thing. Her glowing eyes darted upward toward the drones, then toward the armed officers lining the barricades. For one terrible second, it looked like she might run. The nearest officer raised his voice. "Child, get down now." Ethan shook his head before he even realized he was doing it. "Wait," he shouted back. "She is scared." One of the officers stared at him in disbelief. That thing tore through a secured transport convoy 2 sectors away. Ethan looked back at the alien girl. She did not look like someone trying to attack anybody. She looked tired, lost, like she had not slept in days. Steam drifted slowly off her skin where melted frost touched the heat radiating from her body. Purple blood continued dripping from the wound beneath her hand, splashing softly onto the polished floor beside shattered glass and scattered travel bags. The station lights flickered again. Somewhere above them, another power relay groaned loudly inside the walls. Then the alien girl suddenly stumbled sideways. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Ethan moved instinctively before anybody else did. "Careful," he yelled, rushing forward as her massive frame hit the side of the damaged train car with a deafening metallic thud. The drones instantly repositioned. Threat response active. Ethan threw both arms upward. "No." His voice cracked through the station louder than he expected. The alien girl lowered herself shakily against the train instead of fighting back. Her breathing had become rougher now, almost painful. Ethan finally saw what had been hidden beneath her silver hair and burned clothing. Numbers. Long rows of black identification markings etched directly into the side of her neck. Not tattoos. Labels. Like inventory. Ethan frowned. "They did that to you." The alien girl looked at him again. Confusion crossed her face at the sound of his voice. Slowly, painfully, she lifted one trembling hand toward her throat where the markings disappeared beneath metal restraint bands. One of the older passengers near the barricade whispered, "Dear God." Another muttered quietly, "She is one of the lab survivors." The officers exchanged uncertain looks. The confidence in their posture was starting to crack. Ethan stepped closer again despite the drones hovering barely 10 feet overhead. Up close now, he could hear tiny mechanical clicks coming from the broken restraints around her wrists. The devices looked old, military-grade, with cracked warning symbols barely visible beneath soot and scratches. She had not escaped prison. Somebody had kept her there. Ethan swallowed hard. "What is your name?" The alien girl stared at him silently for several seconds. The alarms continued pulsing red across the station walls while smoke curled around both of them like fog. Then her lips parted slightly. The voice that came out sounded rough and damaged, as if speaking itself caused pain. "V." She stopped, breathing unevenly. Ethan waited patiently. "Veilira," she finally whispered. The station went quiet. Not completely. The sirens still screamed overhead. Sparks still hissed from broken ceiling panels. But for a moment, nobody moved. Because monsters were not supposed to have names. Ethan smiled softly despite the cold not still sitting in his stomach. "I am Ethan," he said again. Veilira blinked slowly at him. Then, for the first time since stepping out of the smoke, her hand moved the rest of the way forward. One massive clawed finger touched the edge of Ethan's bare hand with impossible gentleness. Warm. Shaking. Careful. The little boy did not pull away. And somewhere deep inside the station, beyond the alarms and the panic and the flashing red lights, something changed. For several long seconds, nobody in New Avalon Central Station moved. The officers behind the barricades kept their rifles raised, but the tension in their faces had shifted into something uncertain now. Confused. One security drone hovered lower above Ethan and Veilira, its red targeting beam trembling slightly across the alien girl's shoulder as damaged station lights flickered overhead. Ethan barely noticed any of it. He was too focused on the way Veilira's clawed hand touched his. She was being unbelievably careful, like she thought even the smallest mistake would make the whole world start. Screaming again. Her skin felt warmer than he expected, almost feverish beneath the cold station air. Tiny tremors kept running through her fingers. Ethan looked up at her towering frame and realized she was trying very hard not to scare him. That thought hurt his chest for reasons he could not explain. A burst pipe somewhere above the platform released a cloud of steam with a sharp hiss. Veilira instantly recoiled. Her entire body jerked backward on instinct, silver-white hair whipping across her face as panic flashed through her glowing eyes again. The drones reacted immediately. Threat response escalating. Ethan tightened his hand around one of her fingers without thinking. "It is okay," he said quickly. "It was just the pipes." Veilira stared down at him. Slowly, the panic faded from her expression. Not completely, just enough for her breathing to steady a little. Ethan heard whispers spreading through the crowd behind him. Why is it listening to him? Maybe the kid is calming it down. That thing should not even be alive. One of the older officers lowered his weapon slightly. Gray streaks ran through his beard, and exhaustion lined his face beneath the harsh red emergency lights. "Stand down 2 degrees," he muttered quietly into his headset. "The entity is not engaging." Another officer looked horrified. "Sir, I said stand down." The younger man hesitated before signaling the drones overhead. Their targeting beams shifted from red back to cautious blue. The station atmosphere changed instantly. Still tense. Still dangerous. but no longer seconds away from disaster. Ethan exhaled softly. Veolyra seemed to notice too. Her massive shoulders lowered slightly for the first time since emerging from the smoke. Then Ethan noticed something else. She was staring at his bare hand. More specifically, at the small silver bracelet around his wrist. His father had given it to him before leaving for the Europa mining routes 3 years earlier. The metal had dulled over time, scratched from schoolyards and playground falls, but Ethan still wore it every day. Veolyra's amber eyes lingered on it with strange intensity. Slowly, she reached toward her own neck. Ethan watched her fingers brush against the cracked restraint collar resting there. The metal ring looked heavy, covered in faded warning labels and tiny blinking lights. One section had been broken open violently, leaving sharp, twisted edges near her shoulder. It was not jewelry. It was ownership. Ethan frowned quietly. "Did somebody hurt you?" Veolyra did not answer immediately. Her eyes moved toward the station floor. Around them, the smoke had finally started thinning enough for Ethan to see the destroyed train car more clearly. Deep claw marks covered the outer doors. Not random damage. Escape marks. His stomach twisted. Veolyra finally spoke in that rough, strained voice again. "They chased." Ethan blinked. "Who did?" She looked toward the drones. Toward the officers. Toward the shattered restraints around her wrists. "Everyone." The word landed harder than Ethan expected. Not angry. Not hateful. Just tired. Like she had been running for a very long time. Somewhere beyond the upper platforms, evacuation sirens finally began slowing into lower warning tones. More emergency crews poured into the station carrying medical kits and portable scanners. The older officer approached carefully now, stopping several feet away from Ethan. He kept his hands visible. "Kid," he said gently, "we are trying to help here." Ethan looked up at him, then stopped pointing guns at her. The officer glanced at Veolyra. She stood perfectly still beside the damaged train, injured and exhausted beneath the pulsing emergency lights. Then he looked back at the small human boy holding the hand of the creature everyone else feared. Something unreadable crossed the man's face. And for the first time that night, one of the officers finally lowered his weapon completely. The station slowly began breathing again. Not normally, not safely, but the panic that had swallowed Platform 14 minutes earlier was starting to crack apart beneath confusion and exhaustion. Emergency crews moved carefully through the smoke, carrying portable floodlights and thermal scanners, while maintenance drones crawled along the damaged ceiling above. Sparks still rained occasionally from broken conduits, filling the air, with the sharp smell of burned insulation and hot metal. Ethan stayed beside Veolyra the entire time. He had not even realized his fingers were numb from the cold until one of the medics approached holding out a thermal blanket. "Here, kid," the woman said gently. "You are freezing." Ethan accepted it without taking his eyes off Veolyra. Then, after a brief hesitation, he held the blanket out toward the alien girl instead. Several officers stiffened immediately. Veolyra did too. Her glowing amber eyes locked onto the folded gray fabric as though she expected it to be a trap. Ethan noticed the way her clawed fingers curled slightly near the broken restraint around her wrist. "It is okay," he said softly again. "It just keeps you warm." The medic looked startled for a second before carefully placing the blanket into Ethan's hands instead of approaching the alien directly. Ethan stepped closer and slowly draped part of it over Veolyra's injured shoulder. The massive alien girl froze completely. Ethan wondered suddenly if anyone had ever touched her gently before. The thought made his chest ache in a strange way. Veolyra lowered her eyes toward the blanket wrapped awkwardly across her dark blue skin. Her breathing slowed again. Tiny wisps of steam rose where the warm fabric met the cold air around her body. Temperature levels dropping station-wide. A voice announced overhead through damaged speakers. "Emergency heating offline." Ethan shivered instantly as another blast of icy air swept through the platform. Snow had started drifting faintly through cracks in the shattered upper glass ceiling far above them. Small white flakes melted against the hot metal wreckage surrounding the train tracks. One landed briefly in Veolyra's silver-white hair before disappearing. She stared upward at the falling snow with visible confusion. Ethan blinked. "You have never seen snow before?" Veolyra looked down at him slowly. Then she gave the smallest shake of her head. Her voice remained rough and strained when she answered. "Not real snow." Ethan smiled faintly despite everything around them. It happens a lot in the outer sectors. He held out his hand beneath the broken ceiling until several snowflakes landed across his fingers. See? Veolyra watched carefully, cautiously, like every tiny harmless thing in the station belonged to a world she had never been allowed to enter. The older officer stepped closer again, this time without his helmet. His expression looked older now beneath the flashing emergency lights. More tired than afraid. "We found the transport records," he said quietly to the medic beside him. "She came from Blackwater Research Facility." The medic's face drained of color. "I thought that place was shut down years ago." "Officially," the officer muttered. Ethan looked between them. "What is Blackwater?" Neither adult answered immediately. Veolyra did not look at them at all. She had gone completely still beside the damaged train car, her eyes lowered toward the floor again. The officer sighed heavily. "A military lab," he admitted carefully. "They worked on biological adaptation programs during the border wars." Ethan frowned. "You mean experiments?" Silence. That was enough of an answer. Ethan slowly looked back at the numbers carved into Veolyra's neck. The broken restraints. The fear in her eyes every time a drone moved too quickly. Suddenly none of it looked like the monster stories from the news feeds anymore. It looked like somebody had built a cage around a scared person and then blamed her for trying to escape it. Across the station, civilians were no longer running away. Some still looked frightened. Others simply stared. One little girl hiding behind her father's coat peeked cautiously toward Veolyra before offering a tiny, uncertain wave. Veolyra noticed it immediately. She looked startled enough that Ethan almost laughed. Slowly, awkwardly, the giant alien girl lifted two trembling fingers and waved back. The emergency lights dimmed to half power just after midnight. New Avalon Central Station settled into an eerie red twilight, filled with drifting smoke and the distant hum of repair drones working somewhere beyond the damaged tunnels. Most civilians had finally been evacuated to the upper sectors, leaving Platform 14 strangely quiet after hours of chaos. The silence felt fragile, like the station itself was exhausted. Ethan sat cross-legged beside a cracked support pillar wrapped in two thermal blankets now, one around himself and one draped carefully across Veolyra's shoulders. The giant alien girl remained seated against the wrecked train car nearby, her long legs folded awkwardly beneath her because there simply was not enough room anywhere for someone her size. Snow still drifted softly through the shattered glass ceiling high above them. Tiny white flakes melted against the warm metal of the destroyed platform rails. For the first time all night, nobody was shouting. No alarms. No screaming crowds. Just the low mechanical hiss of broken heating vents and the occasional crackle of damaged wiring overhead. Ethan reached into his backpack and pulled out a crushed chocolate protein bar his mother always packed for long station transfers. The wrapper crinkled loudly in the quiet. Veolyra's glowing amber eyes immediately followed the sound. Ethan noticed and smiled faintly. "You hungry?" Veolyra looked uncertain for a second, as though she did not understand the question itself. Then very slowly, she nodded once. Ethan broke the bar carefully in half and held one piece toward her. "It is peanut butter flavor," he explained. "Not everybody likes it." Veolyra stared at the tiny piece of food resting in his hand. Her expression carried the same confusion she showed whenever someone offered her kindness. Carefully, almost nervously, she reached forward and accepted it between two clawed fingers. Ethan watched closely while she examined the protein bar like some strange artifact from another world. Then she took a cautious bite. Her eyes widened slightly. Ethan laughed before he could stop himself. "Good." Veolyra looked down at the remaining piece in her hand. Then, after a pause that felt almost shy somehow, she gave the smallest nod. "Sweet," she whispered. Ethan grinned. "Yeah, human food does that." Across the platform, two exhausted medics quietly pretended not to watch them. One whispered under her breath, "I still cannot believe this." The older officer standing nearby kept his arms folded tightly against the cold while monitoring station updates on a damaged wrist tablet. Every few minutes he glanced toward Veolyra with the same conflicted expression. Fear was still there, but something else had started replacing it. Guilt maybe. Ethan leaned back against the support pillar. "Did they keep you in that lab your whole life?" Veolyra's face changed instantly. The warmth from moments earlier faded beneath old memories. Ethan could almost see behind her glowing eyes. She lowered her gaze toward the cracked floor. Do not know life before. Her voice remained rough and damaged, every word sounding unfamiliar in her throat. Ethan frowned quietly. You mean you do not remember? Veilira gave a faint shake of her head. One clawed hand moved unconsciously toward the black numbers marked into her neck. Only rooms, she whispered. Cold lights. Testing. Running. The station suddenly felt much colder to Ethan after hearing that. He looked at the broken restraint collar around her throat again and tried imagining someone growing up surrounded only by cages and experiments and people afraid of them. No birthday parties. No snow days. No parents reading stories before bed. Just cold lights and running. Ethan stared down at the untouched half of his protein bar resting in his lap. That is not fair, he muttered quietly. Veilira looked at him strangely. Like fairness was another concept she had never really heard before. A sudden burst of static crackled through the station speakers overhead. Attention security personnel, an automated voice announced. A classified retrieval unit is inbound to Platform 14. Arrival estimated in 8 minutes. Every officer on the platform stiffened instantly. The older man cursed softly beneath his breath. One of the medics looked alarmed. Retrieval unit? The officer's jaw tightened. Blackwater sent people. Ethan looked up immediately. What does that mean? Nobody answered right away. But Veilira did. The moment she heard those words, every trace of warmth disappeared from her face. Her breathing quickened. Her hands began shaking again. And for the first time since touching Ethan's hand, the giant alien girl looked truly terrified. The temperature on Platform 14 kept dropping. Fast enough that Ethan could see his breath now with every exhale. Frost crawled slowly across the shattered railings and broken advertisement screens, while snow drifted through the cracked ceiling in soft white spirals. But none of that explained the cold settling inside Ethan's stomach after the station announcement. Blackwater sent people. The older officer immediately began issuing quiet orders into his headset, while several remaining security personnel repositioned near the upper escalators. Their movements had changed again. Earlier, they looked afraid of Veilira. Now they looked afraid for her. Ethan noticed the difference. Veilira did too. She had pulled the thermal blanket tighter around herself, though it barely covered her massive frame. Her glowing amber eyes stayed fixed on the dark tunnel entrances surrounding the platform, as if she expected something terrible to emerge from them at any second. Ethan slowly stood from beside the support pillar. They are coming to take you back? Veilira did not answer immediately. Her breathing remained uneven. One clawed hand pressed tightly against the cracked restraint collar around her neck, while the blinking lights embedded in the metal flickered weakly red. Finally, in a voice barely louder than the falling snow, she whispered, "No escape twice." Ethan hated the way she said it. Not dramatic, not angry, just certain, like she had already learned how stories like hers ended. Across the station platform, one of the medics approached the older officer carrying a portable scanner tablet. Her vitals are unstable, the woman warned quietly. She needs treatment. The officer rubbed a hand across his tired face. Blackwater classified these subjects as government assets. Ethan frowned hard at that word. Assets. Not people. Not survivors. Assets. He looked back at Veilira sitting silently against the damaged train car with snow collecting slowly in her silver-white hair. She looked less dangerous than half the adults Ethan had seen screaming earlier that night. Suddenly, a deep mechanical rumble echoed through the station tunnels. Every officer on the platform stiffened instantly. The sound grew louder. Heavy. Rhythmic. Not a train. Ethan saw blue tactical lights cutting through the smoke first. Then the retrieval team emerged from the northern access tunnel wearing matte black armored suits with featureless helmets and glowing insignias marked across their shoulders. Blackwater Research Division. There were 6 of them. None carried visible station badges. None looked at the civilians. Their attention locked onto Veilira immediately. The reaction was instant. Veilira recoiled so hard against the train car that twisted metal groaned beneath her weight. Panic flooded her face unlike anything Ethan had seen before. Real fear. The kind that came from memory. One of the armored figures stepped forward. His voice came through external speakers cold and distorted. Biological subject V-17 identified. Ethan froze. Subject. Not even her name. Recovery authorization confirmed. Veolira's hands started shaking violently now. Ethan noticed tears gathering silently in the corners of her glowing eyes before she quickly lowered her face, as if she was ashamed of them. Something inside Ethan snapped at that moment. Before anybody could stop him, he moved directly in front of her. The retrieval team paused. The lead figure tilted his helmet slightly downward toward the small boy standing between them and the giant alien girl. "Step aside, child." Ethan shook his head instantly. "No," the officer behind Ethan cursed under his breath. "Kid." But Ethan did not move. His legs were trembling hard now beneath his winter coat. Yet somehow he stayed standing there anyway. "Her name is Veolira," he said loudly. "She is not a subject." The armored figures remained silent for a moment. Snow drifted slowly through the red emergency lights between them. Then the lead operative spoke again. "The entity is classified as unstable and extremely hazardous." Ethan glanced back at Veolira. She looked terrified, injured, exhausted, and heartbreakingly alone beneath the thermal blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Hazardous was not the word Ethan would have chosen. He turned back toward the retrieval team. "She has not hurt anybody," he said. "You did." The station fell completely silent after that. Even the drones hovering overhead seemed to stop moving. Behind Ethan, Veolira stared down at the small human child, shielding her with wide, glowing eyes that looked almost broken by disbelief. Because no one had ever stood between her and the people chasing her before. Snow drifted silently through the broken ceiling while nobody on Platform 14 seemed willing to breathe. Ethan stood frozen in front of Veolira with his small arms spread slightly at his sides, the oversized winter coat hanging crooked around his trembling shoulders. Behind him, the giant alien girl remained pressed against the wrecked train car, her glowing amber eyes locked onto the back of the little boy protecting her from people 3 times his size. The retrieval team did not lower their weapons, but they did hesitate. The lead operative stared down at Ethan through the black visor of his helmet. "Move aside immediately," the distorted voice repeated. "This unit is property of the Blackwater Research Division." Ethan frowned hard. "She is not property." The operative took one slow step forward. "You do not understand the risk." "No," Ethan answered quietly. "I think you do not understand her." A faint murmur spread through the remaining civilians watching from the upper platforms. Some still looked nervous. Others looked angry now. Not at Veolira. At the people calling her a unit. The older station officer stepped forward carefully beside Ethan. "This station falls under civilian authority," he said firmly. "You do not take anyone through here without oversight." The lead operative barely turned toward him. "Blackwater clearance overrides civilian jurisdiction." "Maybe that used to matter," another voice suddenly called from the upper stairwell. Everyone turned at once. An elderly man in a heavy gray coat descended slowly toward the platform, carrying a weathered data case beneath one arm. His white hair was damp with melting snow, and deep exhaustion lined his face. One of the medics gasped softly. "Dr. Levin?" Veolira reacted instantly to the name. Her entire body stiffened beneath the thermal blanket. Ethan looked back at her, expecting fear again. Instead, he saw something else for the first time. Recognition. The old man stopped several feet from the retrieval team. His eyes settled on Veolira, and for a moment his face simply broke apart with grief. "My God," he whispered softly. "You survived." The lead operative immediately straightened. "Dr. Elias Levin," the distorted voice announced. "You are in violation of containment protocols." The old man ignored him completely. His eyes never left Veolira. "They told us all subjects were lost during the facility collapse," he said quietly. Veolira's breathing quickened again. Ethan noticed her fingers gripping the blanket tightly around herself like armor. "You remember me?" Dr. Levin asked gently. Veolira stared at him for several long seconds before answering in her damaged voice. "You brought books." The old man closed his eyes briefly like the words physically hurt him. Around the station platform, confusion spread through the civilians listening. Ethan looked between them. "You know her?" Dr. Levin nodded slowly without taking his eyes off Veolira. "I was part of the Blackwater program years ago." The retrieval team shifted uneasily. "Doctor," the lead operative warned sharply, "cease unauthorized disclosure immediately." But the old man looked suddenly tired of being afraid. "Unauthorized disclosure," he repeated bitterly. You spent 20 years turning children into experiments, and now you are worried about disclosure? Silence swallowed the station again. Ethan slowly looked back toward Veilira. Children. The word echoed horribly against everything he could already see written across her scarred body. Dr. Levin opened the weathered data case with shaking hands and removed a small projector drive. Blue holographic light flickered alive above the platform, illuminating old Blackwater records in midair. Ethan saw rows of classified files, medical charts, images of frightened alien children standing beneath bright laboratory lights with identification numbers marked across their necks. Veilira appeared in several of them. Younger, smaller, terrified. The adaptation subjects were not soldiers, Dr. Levin said quietly to the civilians watching. Most were war refugees. Orphans. Survivors. His voice cracked. Blackwater promised treatment. Shelter. Instead, they turned them into biological research projects. One of the retrieval operatives stepped forward aggressively. Terminate projection now. The older station officer moved directly into his path. Nobody is terminating anything. Ethan looked back at Veilira one more time. Snowflakes rested silently in her silver-white hair, while tears slipped soundlessly down her face. Not because people feared her anymore, but because for the first time in her life, someone had finally told the truth about what had been done to her. The snow kept falling long after the station finally went quiet. Not the violent panic from earlier. A different kind of silence now. Heavy. Human. The holographic records still floated faintly above Platform 14, casting pale blue light across the damaged train cars and shattered glass, while civilians stared at images they were never supposed to see. Children standing inside laboratory rooms. Numbers marked onto small, frightened bodies. Rows of classified reports stamped with the Blackwater insignia. Nobody on the platform looked at Veilira the same way anymore. The retrieval team lowered their weapons first. One by one, black armored figures stepped backward into the drifting smoke near the tunnel entrance as whispers spread through the remaining crowd above. Angry whispers now. Disgusted ones. The lead operative stared at Dr. Levin for several long seconds before finally speaking through distorted helmet speakers. This disclosure will trigger federal investigation. Dr. Levin looked exhausted beneath the station lights. Good, he answered quietly. It should have years ago. The operative hesitated once more before signaling his team toward the tunnel. No threats. No dramatic final words. They simply left. Because monsters only stay monsters while nobody knows who created them. Ethan did not fully understand everything that had happened that night. He was only 8 years old, but he understood enough to know one thing clearly. Veilira had spent her whole life being hunted for surviving something terrible. The giant alien girl remained seated beside the damaged train even after the retrieval team disappeared. Snowflakes rested softly across the thermal blanket wrapped around her shoulders, while station workers moved cautiously around the platform, repairing shattered rails and flickering lights. Nobody pointed weapons at her anymore. Nobody screamed. A few civilians even offered small, uncertain smiles before being escorted toward the upper exits. Veilira seemed more confused by kindness than fear. Ethan walked back over to her slowly. They are gone, he said softly. Veilira looked down at him with those glowing amber eyes that no longer seemed frightening beneath the station lights. Just tired. For now, she whispered. Ethan frowned. Then they will have to go through me again. The words slipped out naturally, simple and honest in the way only children can manage. Veilira stared at him in complete silence afterward. Then something unexpected happened. The giant alien girl smiled. Very small, very uncertain, but real. It changed her entire face. For the first time since stepping out of the smoke hours earlier, she stopped looking like a creature waiting to be punished. She looked young. Ethan smiled back instantly. See? You should do that more. A soft laugh escaped her throat before she could stop it. The sound startled both of them. Veilira covered her mouth slightly as though laughter itself felt unfamiliar. Nearby, one of the medics quietly wiped tears from her eyes while pretending to reorganize medical supplies. The older station officer approached carrying a thick winter scarf someone from the civilian shelters had donated. He handed it awkwardly toward Ethan. Thought she might need this. Ethan accepted it carefully. The scarf was dark blue with tiny silver stars stitched along the edges. He stepped closer to Veilira and lifted it toward her neck. Can I? Veilira lowered her head slightly so he could reach. Ethan wrapped the scarf carefully around the cold metal restraint collar still locked against her skin, covering the ugly black markings and blinking warning lights beneath soft fabric for the first time. Veilira touched the scarf slowly after he finished. Her clawed fingers trembled against the stitched silver stars. "Pretty," she whispered. Ethan grinned. "Yeah, it matches your eyes." Somewhere above the station ceiling, dawn finally began creeping across New Avalon City. Pale golden sunlight filtered through the shattered glass overhead, melting snowflakes where they touched the rails. The red emergency lights faded gradually beneath warm morning light. Ethan heard his mother calling his name from the upper platform seconds before she appeared running through the station with tears streaming down her face. He barely had time to stand before she wrapped him tightly in her arms. "Ethan," she breathed shakily. "I thought I lost you." Ethan hugged her back hard. Then he looked over her shoulder toward Veilira, sitting quietly beside the damaged train beneath the first sunlight she had probably ever seen, without bars around her. The giant alien girl lifted one hand slowly in farewell. Ethan waved back immediately, and as the morning light touched the silver scarf around her neck, nobody on Platform 14 saw a monster anymore. They only saw a frightened girl who had finally learned what a human hand could feel like when it reached toward you instead of away.